Hello and welcome to another episode of Scala Space Podcast. Today we are going to talk about Scala free migrations for true actual products built with Scala. And with me are Łukasz Krenski of MIWI and Matthieu Baechler, a freelancer Scala developer from France. So guys, I would like to kick off with some information, some overview of the projects you worked on. For Łukasz, I think it's just a single project. I think Matthieu worked on more than one migration. Am I right?
Yeah. I worked on several ones, but I would say that there's only one that were big enough to have problems.
Okay. So Matthieu, could you briefly explain what the project you worked on is doing? What kind of software that is?
Yeah, of course. The project is something called Rudder, which is on-premise software, and it exists for more than a decade. So it started maybe with Scala 2.8 or something like that, and they actually ship this software, maintain it in different versions, but we'll probably talk about the specifics later.
Okay, Łukasz?
Yeah, so MIWI is a social media platform. Since I'm on the podcast, it is implemented in Scala, at least the backend is. And what's especially interesting in the migration sense is that it's a 13 years old code base. It started at Scala 2.8.1. I checked the first commit recently and used Lift. So quite a few migrations on the way, I would say, from blocking to features and removing Lift and all that stuff. So and in a time like that, 13 years, and Scala developers especially, they try stuff out. They basically use anything you can. So we have macros, shapeless here and there, async await, which was experimental, and also it's a single repo with multiple services. So doing an incremental migration was challenging to say the least.
Okay. Since you already got into this topic, are there any specific things that had to be taken into account when thinking about migration in those codebase? I'm asking because I do recall a public tweet by Francois. I think he owns the company, the Rudder IO company, in which he explained publicly that, well, the migration will be difficult for Rudder because the project has several versions that are deployed as final products, final artifact deployed to infrastructure of their customers. So Matthieu, could you tell us briefly about those specific things that required planning, if there were any?
Yeah, of course. Just as the first disclaimer, I'm not part of the company. I worked only as a contractor, so I may say things that are not very accurate, and I'm sorry about that. The thing is, they are maintaining free versions, and when I say versions, it's like long-running version. It's not like you are maintaining them for a few weeks. It's months or years. So you have basically three branches deployed somewhere, and you have to release some updates with bug fixes, security fixes, and so on a regular basis. Francois told me that it's quite usual for them to switch from one of this version to another like several times a day. So they basically have this code basis on their daily routine, and they are backporting things from one version to the other quite frequently. So the further the code base is in one version from the other, the hardest it is for them to backport things. So one of the constraints of this migration is to find the right balance between migrating the free branches to something close to Scala free, to have less difficulty when you are backporting things, with the other things, which is you don't want to break a software that is just in maintenance mode. So you have to find the right balance between having the same syntax and not breaking things. So you for every change you bring during the migration, you have to ponder, is this thing going in the branch or not, and so on.
Okay, Łukasz, so what about the quite antiquated, or rather, let's say old code base of MIUI?
Yeah, we mostly try to keep it tidy-ish, I would say. But in a time zone like that, there are bound to be some artifacts from the past, and we were quite aware of some potential issues that might be happening for us. Mostly, like when people think Scala 3, they probably think macros are different. So, in our example, we forked a long time ago. We forked a library from Foursquare, which is called Rogue, and it's a library for accessing MongoDB, and it is using macros. It was using macros and shapeless, so we knew that was a time bomb that we had to take care of before attempting to migrate our main code base, which also uses macros in a couple of ways, but not as extensively as in Rogue. So those were our main concerns, along with making sure that the ecosystem is actually ready on Scala 3.
Okay, so before we go into details of the migrations, there's one thing that we should probably make everybody aware of. Is the migration story finished for both of you? Matthieu?
Yeah. So sadly, it's not. It really depends what you mean when you say it closed or not. From my side, we basically have something that is compiling, which is already a good step. But we have runtime issues. The problem with migration, I will say, is that you don't really know it's finished until it's finished. It's true for software development in general, but most for migrations things. So hopefully there's a single remaining runtime issue, but it could be the first before a long series. So no, it's not finished, but yeah, I think that in any case, there's no language issue anymore. There's only dependencies issues that we have to sort out, maybe.
Okay, so the code of Rudder itself is compiling with Scala 3. There are just things that are dependencies that need to be sorted out, and given the specific lifecycle of Rudder, it's yet to be seen whether everything works correctly in runtime. Is this right? Is this correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, Łukasz?
So in our case, it's actually about 50% done in terms of the number of services running in production. So half of them are actually running Scala 3. The whole code base is compiling in Scala 3. The whole code base, all of our tests pass. So we are very optimistic in terms of actually migrating the whole thing. But there's one little detail, one little PR that is actually merged to Scala 3 master, but it's not present in any stable releases yet. It's what we are waiting for the final push, and we will get to that.
Okay. So let's get to the most interesting part, which is how did it go? I wanted to start with a small inquiry about whether the promises that were given about how the migration will go from the compiler team itself, whether those promises did hold. So Scala had this long running up phase for the migration, before the migrations were to happen, where things were added to 2.13 version so that they ease the transition. There were things added to the build tools to support work with dependencies between libraries. I wanted to ask how that part worked for you. So were the additionals added to, additional flags added to the compiler helpful for you? Was build tooling working for you properly when you started the migration? Łukasz.
Yeah, so we definitely did use whatever was ported back to Scala 2.13. So the source 3 flag, we started using that probably as soon as it came out, and tried to deal with as many warnings that we could, basically just to limit the number of things that we would eventually have to change, and also do it more incrementally. So that's definitely very helpful and worked fine. Yeah, that's the main point for the Scala 13 part. Also, the tasty reader flag that was added. I actually, before we started the migration, I implemented a library in Scala 3, and we started using it from 2.13. Then that worked perfectly as well. So that was also quite helpful.
Okay, Matthieu.
Yeah, so we basically use the same xsource free and then later the xsource free cross flags. I would say that there are some false negatives in the compiler sometimes with these flags compared to the real Scala free compiler. Like for example, I have one thing in my head. There were at some point, maybe it's fixed, a false positive when you are trying to have a private constructor to a case class. Basically, when you are doing a smart constructor pattern, you don't want people to just instantiate your case class. At some point, it complained that you couldn't have this private tier because reason I don't remember exactly, but it was a false positive. So I tried to find the reason of this warning to later understand it was just a mistake of the compiler. So sometimes it happens, but it's mostly very good stuff. It helps a lot changing the code base so that it's closer to the Scala free syntax. The second thing is about the migration tools provided in the compiler. One thing I didn't say about the project I worked on is that it's using Maven. It's not using SBT. So you are a bit like alone there. So typically, it was really hard to use these built-in migration steps from the Scala Maven plugin. So I had to find where the rules, because it's actually Scala fix rules, or at least it was for at the time I was doing that. So I basically applied the Scala fix rules by using a plugin that is working in Maven. So yeah, I couldn't use the built-in thing in Scala C, but a good thing is that it's relying on tooling that is already well used in the community. So it's quite easy to take it and reuse it with the tools that actually work in your case. So it's really a good finding that I did there. And the rules are quite good. I would say that one thing I couldn't use and took me some time is that when you are asking the rules to put some explicit types on public methods or public values and so on.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually providing FQDN types. So yeah, my client was not so happy about it, so I did it by hand in the end. There, I didn't found any solution to have the annotation with a shorter syntax.
Oh, I can relate to that, but on the BSOM front, on the BSOM experience, we also generate a lot of code, and it's a hard problem to find non-clashing imports to shorten them. So yeah, I understand why ScalaFix does that. So continuing the topic of compiler stuff and the language tooling stuff, well, maybe let's focus on the compiler itself. Did you have a situation during the migration that there were differences between how version 2 of the language worked and language version 3 worked?
I actually had some cases where I don't really remember exact code, but whenever I saw that code stopped compiling on Scala 3, I questioned why it even compiled on Scala 2. Like, I couldn't understand what was going on. So in quite a few places, it seems like we mistakenly abused some kind of edge case or some different interaction of Scala 2 features that didn't really make that much sense. And I immediately always posted that on Slack and said, what is this? So there's a side benefit of migrating to Scala 3 where your code is getting a little bit better in those small instances.
Okay.
Yeah, I had similar things like pattern matchings that were really weird, or the use of early returns that I couldn't even understand, and it forced us to rewrite these things into a much saner syntax that people can actually understand. So yeah, it forces you to streamline a bit your code base, and it's a good thing, I think.
Okay. So did you find any issues in the compiler? How would you rate the stability of Scala 3 at the time when you were migrating? Was it already production grade ready?
For the most part, I would say so. Well, we actually started the big push for the migration once the LTS came out. So it was kind of a signal that both the compiler team and Virtus Lab is actually quite confident in the compiler itself. So it gave us the confidence. But we did encounter some errors. Well, our code base is quite big, as you might imagine, and one very weird bug turned up in our tests, actually, which was when mixing a lot of traits into the same class, some of the super methods stopped being called. Like they were called in the Scala 2 version, and they stopped being called in the Scala 3 version. It was pretty hard for me to create the reproducer script, but I actually managed to do it in a nice Scala CLI script. So posted it on the GitHub for Scala 3, and Martin himself fixed it. So there wasn't a big issue to actually getting a bug fixed. So that was quite nice.
Oh dear.
Yeah, on my side, the first thing is that Virtus Lab already tried a migration a year earlier. So basically, they found some compilation issues that were fixed by the time I took the subject back 1 year ago. So I will say that the Scala 3.3 version has been working really well for me. I didn't have really big issues. I did had some difference of behaviors. Like, for example, we had this constructor that is really big, and the way that the code is generated in the Java bytecode is generated in Scala 3 changed a bit, and so the methods became too big for Java to be happy with. So we had to deal with this very huge constructor by actually changing some def into some val into some def, but it's just a different way of building the code, and it can be expected, as a real limitation is actually in the Java compiler. So it's just something that you don't expect, but it's not really a Scala issue, in my opinion.
Okay. And feature-wise, there are some features that are new in Scala 3. There are some things like, the whole metaprogramming API basically that are gone. Did you encounter, beside the obvious pains, like having to rewrite macros, did you encounter any significant issues or problems with the features that were added or were just new in Scala 3?
Yeah, so one example of that would be inlining, which there's a Scala compiler flag called -x max inlines, which sounds kind of scary, like a limitation that you set on the compiler, and you might expect it to be scary to make it higher. I don't remember the default, but it's pretty low compared to what we ended up with. Like basically, moving the migration forward with every project, we had to bump it up a little bit higher, mostly because of things like big case classes and generating like a codec for JSON parsing, stuff like that. So we ended up with a value of 120, which kind of sounds scary, like the number of layers of inlining that the compiler has to go through. But in the end, I guess it works. So maybe it's not that big of a problem.
Yeah. Okay. Fair point. I did hit that also in my code. Interesting part, if I may add something from my side, is that for the bigger part, going through the inlines just straight to the macros themselves usually solves the problem completely. Okay. Okay. So I guess we can talk about another issue that many people mention when talking about migration to Scala 3, and that's the support of tooling, of the developer tooling, actually, the stuff that we use for work. So I wanted to ask both of you how the situation with IDE support looked like when you were starting the migration. Did it change during the migration? I'm not sure how long it took for your companies or clients to migrate to Scala 3. And how would you rate the tooling situation now? Łukasz?
Sure. So most of the developers at our company are using IntelliJ. We historically had issues with metals, mostly because of the build size and using a lot of shapeless. A long time ago, I did a profile of the memory, and shapeless left a lot of stuff in the class loader. So we kind of make an attempt to use metals from time to time, but mostly go back to IntelliJ. And honestly, when we started the migration, it was a bit rough. A lot of red false positives in the IDE, but with every version update, you can definitely see an improvement. So the tooling is getting better. Things like experiments that you talked about in the last episode also sound like it will get even better. So yeah, one issue we have is that our code base is in a single build, in a single SBT build, and IntelliJ doesn't really love that. If I would say basically a mix of Scala 2 and Scala 3. If we have a shared library between the two versions, the code navigation either works in one or the other. It's kind of you have to pick your battles. I stopped updating IntelliJ some time ago because something changed, and now it works better in Scala 3, but worse in Scala 2. So I'm waiting for the whole switch to actually update, and also I'm planning to give another try to Scala 3 or to metals with Scala 3 because there's no more shapeless, no more stuff like that, and hopefully it can handle our project from now on.
It does handle the compiler itself, so there's hope. That's an SBT build, right?
Yes, yeah,
okay.
That's an
SBT mono repo. Okay.
Yeah, and you might actually argue that maybe SBT is not the best choice for this, but
So are your developers, the teams that work with you, already using Scala 3 in the products that are being developed right now?
In a few of the services, yes, we use Scala 3.
Okay, so would you say there's a difference between productivity for developers between the two versions? Is this not something that can be noticed on a daily basis?
Honestly, it's kind of hard to say. We don't really try to measure that, and honestly, the main part of the project is still actually on Scala 2, like the core of it. So it's hard to compare. I don't think we notice any big issues either way.
Okay, so it is positive. I would say that there are no glaring differences that you could already pinpoint. Matthieu.
Maybe to start with, I work on several Scala 3 projects, so I can maybe one part of the answer is about Scala 3 support, as is not the migration part. So I'm using IntelliJ for historical reasons mainly, and I will say that I just changed my expectation, I think, and so I'm quite happy with what I have. Like I lowered my expectation, of course, but
I was afraid you were gonna add that.
Yeah, it's a bit slower. There are a bit less help and so on, but it's definitely going the right way with every version. But I know that people I work with are less happy about the situation, to be honest. That's for the Scala 3 support part, and for the migration part. The thing is, when you start using the X-source-free flags, or each new flag that is introduced for a migration, because X-source-free cross is a new one, and you may have, at least at the time I was doing the migration, I had a lag in IntelliJ support. Like they took 1 month before supporting the flag, and for that time they were not able to just import the project because they try, I don't know, to parse the command line, or I don't know exactly what they are doing, but it was lost. They didn't handle this flag, so you couldn't just open the project at all. So for some time it was not that good.
Okay.
But they are quite reactive. I think I opened a ticket, or maybe it was already open, and it took something like a month. And as it's not something I work on a daily basis, but like twice a month, it was okay to just wait a bit for having the next upgrade. So I would say that they are quite following quite well the Scala evolution. But yeah, of course, you can't have the features ready in IntelliJ the day they are out on the Scala side. So it makes sense to lag a bit.
Yeah, sure. I wanted to ask what the decision was. Did you just stop using this flag for a month? Or
no, actually I cheated, because the thing is, I think I remember it tries to parse to understand the build with your Maven description, and then it imports with the right flag, for example. when you say X source 3, you can put some stars instead of underscore for wildcards. But
Okay.
your IDE has to understand you are in that mode to allow you to do that. So I think they tried to understand which mode they were on. So the thing I did is I changed the versions, the flags to something that allowed me to import it in IntelliJ, and then I changed it back to be able to compile it in a command line, and then I could do the edits in IntelliJ with some errors that were not so important, and do the compilation by hand. And the worst thing in all that is obviously Maven, which is not able to build incrementally projects. So you have to build your module again and again, completely something that is not very productive compared to what you are used to with SVG.
Okay.
So this period of time was not very productive, to be honest, but it was manageable anyway.
I have to say, I'm a bit worried about your standards, but yeah. Okay. So I think we can move to another topic, and that is a topic that is highly contentious, I would say. I did a poll. We are doing a research at Virtus Lab to better understand the troubles and issues Scala developers face when maintaining older Scala code bases. And to my surprise, I was almost sure that Spark would be the biggest offender with its version lagging. But no, it turns out the biggest problem is the state of the ecosystem, fragmentation, and the maintenance status of the ecosystem. So this topic, I am aware, is a big problem for all the people that do migrations, especially if the projects are larger and older and have older libraries that might not be well maintained or maintained at all. I wanted to ask how the migration was affected by the state of ecosystem, and were they built-in solutions to ease the transition period helpful for you? Łukasz?
Yeah, so that's the part of the migration that was, I would say, slightly overpromised with the cross-version usage, mostly the backwards compatibility with using version of the Scala library artifact from Scala 2 in Scala 3. Assuming macros are not involved, it does work unless transitive dependencies are in the mix, which unfortunately that's the more common of the situations, I guess. For example, if you have a small library that adds just like an unmarshaller for ACAP HTTP. This could be a single class in the code. If you use akka 3 and this library from akka 2 from Scala 3, you will run into problems most likely because first of all, SVT will reject your build because you depend on two versions of akka with the same version but different Scala versions. You can try to exclude the akka dependency from the transitive dependencies, but then you are relying on binary compatibility between the versions in Scala 2 and 3, which I just saw a bunch of method does not exist exceptions. So you don't want that. So really, for the cross-version building, you have to really be mindful of the transitive dependencies and try to actually limit that as much as you can. If it's a simple library with no dependencies, go for it. Like it works very well both ways, I would say, excluding macros. But with transitive dependencies, it's really a risky strategy to go for.
Okay, is it caused by, because I would like to understand that a bit better. Is it caused in situations where the transitive dependencies. Let's say you have this library for Akka serialization, the Marshall library. I believe it was the library by Heiko Seeberger, I think, or maybe I'm mistaken. But anyway, you have this library, and it has dependency with other libraries, right? So is the problem caused by a situation where you have different dependency that pulls this library and you have a conflict?
Yeah, exactly. Either you depend on the same dependency directly, like on HTTP, for example, that because you use that directly, or you have the diamond problem of different libraries depending on different versions of the same library. And in a single Scala version, SBT is kind of able to figure out which version to use, unless there's major differences. But as soon as you use two Scala versions, it kind of all breaks apart.
Oh, okay. Well, that's not a happy news. Okay, so let's maybe go through other issues with the ecosystem and libraries. Matthieu, do you have any stories about that?
Yeah, I think that maybe I can react with what Łukasz just said, because actually in Maven you don't have this problem of having free for free use 2.13, because it's actually two different artifact names, so you can very well choose exactly what you want, so you don't need this flag. And yeah, I used that a lot, sadly. But one thing that I think we can talk about that is interesting is that that in Scala 3.3 they are using, if I'm not mistaken, the Scala 2.13 library, so that it's binary compatible. But it's only through to Scala library, and there are smaller libraries that are also released with the Scala language, for example, Scala XML or Scala Parser, but they don't come with that guarantee. So the problem I had with transitive dependencies is that it pulls this Scala Parser, for example, library, and it's not binary compatible, and so I fall into the same problem you just described. But yeah, just to state that the compatibility guarantee is only for Scala library and nothing else. And it's something, obviously, when you cheat with that, it's runtime errors, what we obviously don't like as Scala developers.
Yeah.
Otherwise, as Łukasz said, I think that the main problem is macro related things. For example, on the project we were using something called Celerate, which is a subset of what enumeratum does. So this kind of change is not that hard to do, because you just have the same features in enumeratum that you use in Celerate. But so you do that before doing the migration to Scala 3, and it's fine. Sometimes obviously it's different libraries, so sometimes there's things that does not behave the same. For example, Celerate had a very fun thing, that is, you can enumerate field traits that are containing case classes and not only case objects, which is really weird, because you can't list something that is not a singleton. It doesn't really make sense. So it was actually filtering that out, and you can't do that with enumeratum. But we fall back to the fact that you just have to rewrite your code in a sane way. So basically, I think it's once again a good thing that happens to the code base.
Okay. So how would you say, what is the percentage of libraries that your projects use that had issues? I'm basically asking about the state of the ecosystem percent-wise.
Yeah.
So,
to me, it's really good. I mean, I'm only talking about a couple small libraries or a very small subset of libraries that are not supported, but because everything else is working basically. So I think every important problem has been sorted out maybe a year ago or more than that, and we are in a very mature situation. It's my experience at least.
Okay, Łukasz, is it your experience also?
Yeah, for the most part. So on our side, we mostly stick to Akka and type level stacks, both actually. And in terms of type level, I think everything was available fairly soon after the Scala 3 release. I remember a lot of effort was put into that to be ready for the release. One thing we had to wait a long time for was Circe generic extras, which was like an extension of Circe with some customizable macros, basically. And in the end, it was pulled into the Circe, like the main code base, and it's available. So that's very nice. Although one thing is still missing, which is generating codecs for the old Scala 2 enumerations. I'm not sure why that is. There's an open PR for that. So we basically had to recreate the feature in our own code base, and works perfectly. On the other hand, on Akka side, so Akka itself, the last open source, the last non-licensed problematic version, which for us, we didn't want to migrate to the newer version for various reasons. It has a Scala 3 version, but Alpaca doesn't. Alpaca contains, for example, the Kafka client for Akka streams. And the first version with Scala 3 support was actually on the newer license, unfortunately. So we were basically aware that Akka, we would have to do something with Akka at some point. And once Pecco was released with Scala 3 support, we basically migrated to that. And I have to say kudos to the developers working on Pecco. They did a great job. The migration was mostly painless. They accepted a couple of fixes and fixed issues. So very good experience with that. Yeah, and we had some issues with libraries that are no longer maintained even in Scala 2 and use macros. So we had to get rid of a Cassandra client called Phantom, which is abandoned for a long time. But again, this is something that you don't want in your code base. You don't want to rely on a dependency that is abandoned. So actually, migrating to Scala 3 forced us to clean it up and not use something that is unmaintained and could bite us in the future because of a different reason. So.
Okay. Well, did you encounter any other issues with the migration that we haven't touched upon?
Yeah, I actually had small problem with the ecosystem too. Like, I disagree on some points with I think with Lucas. For example, we are using a library called cron4s, which is, as you can expect, is parsing a cron-like expression and gives you a nice data structure, and it's not really unmaintained, but it's very low maintenance. But at the same time, we don't expect cron expression to change a lot. So it makes sense that this library is stale or something like that. And it's not an issue for your code base because probably just in a small part of your application, and it's okay that way. The thing is, you still have to migrate that part, even if it's a tiny feature. So it's a case where you open the project, look at what has been done or not done. Actually, you look at the issues. And my experience in these small cases is that most of the time you have tickets asking for Scala 3 support on almost each library I looked at, there were question and discussion about that, even if it's low maintenance. And yeah, on that kind of libraries, most of the time it's just a lack of manpower that is preventing migration. So for the Crown Forest situation, there were blogs for months on a thing that changed on JS annotation when you cross-compile to JS, Scala to JS. You know? And it was just a documentation part of the build that was failing. Everything else was already spotted, you know. So they were just waiting for somebody to fix the build, which I did with like one-line patch, of course. What's not trivial because I had to read some docs about it, but it's what you can expect when you are relying on maybe exotic library, or not exotic, but maybe more domain-oriented libraries.
Sure.
And I think it's quite common to have libraries that are not on par in their 2.13 and 3 version. For example, Spex2, which I think is quite used. They do not support something called fragment, which allows to build your test programmatically or something like that. And it's using macros. I don't know why, but it's just not supported in the Scala-free version. So just find a way. It's just about test. So we find a way to write it in something else. Actually, we are using also ZeroTest. So we just ported that part to ZeroTest, and we are done with it without any risk on the code base, because it's just test. So it's not the same kind of problem. And finally, the last example I have, which is probably the funniest, is that the project is using something called Lift, which is a web framework from the past. I think I was not involved in the Scala community when it exists, so I never used it. But most of the project is still relying on Lift in like any module, because they use some constructs. They are still using some constructs that were provided by the core module of Lift, which is something like tasks in CAT, or task also in Zero. Yeah, so it's a bit everywhere in the code base, and there will probably never be a Scala-free version of it. So yeah, it's a part where we try to use a 2.13 version of the library, and it's the biggest unknown remaining, and the only, I would say, a runtime error that we have left. But yeah, for this kind of things, obviously, we can't really expect a project that is basically dead for years, but for maintenance to catch up with Scala-free.
Yeah, I mean,
but I would just add that if you have that in your project, you know that you are in trouble.
Yeah,
it doesn't mean that you can't sort it out, but you know it.
I wanted to say that I remember that Lift was updated. I mean, it gets updates, I think, so it's not completely dead. But yeah, you're right that we shouldn't probably expect it to be migrated to Scala-free.
I think there's a forked version with updated libraries, but the main project doesn't have the updates, as far as I know.
Oh.
But there are ongoing discussion about migrating it to Scala-free on mailing list. But once again, with putting the manpower to do the actual upgrade, I'm not sure it will end anywhere.
Yeah.
Okay. As far as exotic features go, I mentioned previously async await in Scala, and it is a experimental feature of Scala 2. So it basically rewrites your async await direct-ish style code to features with flat maps. And of course, someone in our company at some point tried to use that, because why not? And we have some code with that. This feature is not present in Scala 3, obviously, but there's this cps.t experimental library, which does this with macros.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually has like a shim artifact that you can put in, and it pretends to be the old Scala async support with the same imports and stuff like that, and it works.
It works.
Except in one very specific case. So we also use Scala logging, which is another library which uses macros. And in our case, when using both this async await syntax macro-based in Scala 3 and having Scala logging calls, which are actual macros inside of the async await block, very weird things happen. Basically, I think the .tcps library does some kind of strange transformation that is not compatible with macros inside of it.
Oh.
So I have no idea. Like, I have a reproduce in a small Scala CLI, but I don't even know where to post it, because who knows whose fault is that? Is it Scala logging? Is it CPS? Is it the compiler? I would guess the CPS library, but just keep in mind, you will have some kind of wrong AST compilation error that will be very weird, and just get rid of it, just rewrite it to regular for comprehensions or flat maps, and you will be good.
Yeah. If you're wondering where to send such things, you can send them to me, and I have friends at the compiler team that will be very happy to, rather interested to take a look at what is happening there. But it's such an exotic combination, like using two macro-based rewriting libraries in the same scope, that I'm surprised that it even worked in the usual case. And the interaction, I wouldn't even hope that it would work. So Łukasz, did you encounter any issues that were really troublesome in the migration itself? Something that blocked you from progressing further?
Yeah, so there was one thing. We basically made the whole migration ourselves with the code, with the dependencies, all of that stuff. Tests pass, and there is just one small little detail at the end of this journey. Our compile times went up basically 4 times the whole project, and yeah, this was disappointing at first, but we didn't get frustrated yet. We tried some stuff. So my first gut reaction was it's probably macro.
Was it for every module, like?
No, it was like the whole code base, but in the end we tracked it down to a single module of the project. So this single module, unfortunately, is the biggest one. So so that was why it was unfortunate.
Yeah.
At first, I was thinking must be macros. We use a lot of our own macros. We use a lot of deriving from CRC. Probably something is less optimized than in the old versions. So I basically tried to search and replace all the deriving code with triple question marks, see if it helps, because it should compile but not run them. But this didn't help at all. So macros were off the table in terms of suspects. There is a profiling flag in Scala 3, which basically shows the calculated complexity of different files, and I tried that, and there were some cases where actually macros would produce a lot of complexity, but it didn't seem too correlated with the compile times.
Okay.
And yeah, we were almost about to give up and basically wait for a different release and hope that things improve without our attention. But then someone on our team suggested that, this company, Virtus Lab, they offer free migration support. We did the migration, but this is kind of related, so why not contact them? And thankfully, it went through our legal department, and all of that stuff was pretty quick. So we were able to give access to Wojciech from Virtus Lab, who he would be probably the better person to talk about this. But as far as I can tell, he basically ported a feature from the Scala 3 compiler that would allow him to profile it even better, in even more detail.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, he found issues with two issues with the inference, type inference, and both of them are actually related to one of my favorite libraries in the Scala ecosystem, which is Tapir. Tapir uses a lot of type parameters for every endpoint, and if you have a list of endpoints, they all have different type parameters, and Scala 3 is smarter than Scala 2. It tries to infer much more, like because of the union types and stuff like that. Unfortunately, it was also much slower at that. So this is actually the issue that is blocking us from fully migrating to Scala 3. Okay. But in the latest RC1 of 3.5.1, I tested it and it is resolved. There were a couple of PRs related to these issues, so finally we will be able to have the compile times roughly at the same level as on Scala 2. So kudos to Wojciech.
So after this issue is fixed, the compile times aren't bigger, aren't slower?
I didn't test this recently, but it's in the same ballpark. So yeah,
that's reassuring. Okay, so maybe let's finally, we talked about all the issues, all the problems. Let's maybe quickly talk about whether it was worth it. Beside the obvious reasons like having the latest bug fixes and patches and security fixes, are there things that you found like massively, or maybe not even massively, but improving your daily coding practice? Is it better experience for you after you have completed the migration? If you know what I mean.
I may start. So yeah, the thing is, in my case, we don't want to use Scala-free features because we want the code base, the free branches of the code base to be as similar as possible. So basically, we are just compiling Scala to code with a Scala-free compiler. So there is very little benefit in terms of using new features because obviously we can't use them. But yet the compiler is better. Like it's able to find useless pattern matching cases. It forces you to rewrite early return things into another syntax and so on. So I would say that the migration in general, but the compiler in particular, forces you to streamline everything to make things more regular to any developer coming to the code base. And this is, in my opinion, very interesting feature of having this new version, having the migration.
Yeah, I can definitely echo the pattern matching exhaustivity checking. We had a few warnings about that we didn't have in the Scala 2 version. So that's definitely a big plus. For me personally, when I switch between Scala 2 and 3 sub projects, I instantly feel it in the boilerplate in Scala 2. Like you have enums, derives using and given. You have to write a lot less unnecessary stuff in Scala 3, and you can express the same thing, which also makes you make the code more type safe, because I could use an enum or I could use a string. I will use an enum because it's much clearer and much better in that way. Sure. Big benefit for me was we had a few places where shapeless was used because it kind of fit, like HList or something like that. And now with union types and tuples, the new tuples in Scala 3, we were able to replace all of the usages of shapeless with direct Scala 3 features. So I was very happy about that. You have better the built-in better monadic for, which was a compiler plugin for Scala 2. In Scala 3, you have to use source feature, I think, but still it's built in. So that's also a very nice addition, I would say. And if you are implementing macros, the Scala 3 version is just a better experience. While in the tooling you might not get much help, obviously, but we are able to get more features in our derivation with better error messages. Previous error messages were basically I don't work, and now we can put in nice error messages from the macro itself, and it shows up in the IDE, even in IntelliJ. Previous version didn't really interact with IntelliJ at all, so that's also a big improvement in my opinion.
Cool. Okay, so I would like to remind the viewers that are live that it is possible to ask questions, and that would be a good moment to start asking them, as we are getting near to the end of the podcast. So, talking about our viewers, are there any things, any tips or suggestions that you would like to pass to our viewers about how to approach the migration? What things work and what is not worth the effort, what is not worth the attention? Matthieu?
I think the strategy is quite simple. First thing you want is to have your code base as close to Scala-free code base while still compiling with Scala 2. So you start with putting these flags XOR3 or XOR3 cross and incrementally enable rules and migrate your code base. So it's something you can do right now without any migration project because it will probably be for the better in your project, and there's no drawback, in my opinion, to enable that. I will do that. I will also look at libraries that are not supported in Scala 3 and maybe do the planned migration of these libraries so that your code base in Scala 2 uses mainly or only, if possible, libraries that are supported in Scala 3. And then, of course, I will enable all the flag that you can imagine to provide warnings, because each warning in Scala 2 may be a breaking thing in Scala 3, because sometimes Scala 3 is a bit more picky about syntax or edge cases and things like that. And then finally, the final step, once you've done all that, is to run the migration tools that are provided with Scala C. That it does most of the work, actually. So it may even be enough to do the migration, actually. In some smaller project, I just did that, basically. And sometimes it's a part where you can't have a really fast feedback, because maybe there are libraries that only work in Scala 3 and not Scala 2, and so you need to do the migration of this library at the same time as you are migrating your code base, and it's the most annoying part. But for example, if you use, I don't know, Refined, I think Refined is not supported in Scala 3. I can't remember, but a library that is not ported in Scala 3, and you have a replacement for Scala 3 that, like Iron, and it's not supported in Scala 2. So this switch, you won't be able to do it easily. You have to do it in single time. So it's the only annoying part, but everything else is quite straightforward to do in my experience. And I wanted to add, because I heard you talk about a lot of very technical things about Scala, the language, the compiler, and so on. I'm really not at that level. I'm just a Scala developer, and I don't understand every single thing that are in the compiler and the language. And yet I had been able to manage several migration. I mean, it's not it doesn't require a very high level of skills, even though sometimes you need experts, as you mentioned, and there are experts available. But I mean, for most projects, you don't need that kind of level. So my message will be just don't be afraid of doing that.
Cool, Łukasz.
Yeah, definitely keep up with your dependencies, like Matthieu said. Even changing the Scala version in the case of an SBT project, changing the Scala version and running SBT update will show you some potential candidates that will be maybe come up as issues later. So we did that periodically for some time, and the list got smaller and smaller, and in the end it got to a manageable situation. I can recommend the Scala migration official documentation, which unfortunately it is for SBT, written from an SBT perspective with a dedicated SBT plugin, and it works quite well, I would say. So try that out. Yeah, obviously, if you can, try Scala 3 in a separate project to get a feel for the tooling. And yeah, also for macros, if you have macros. Not everyone has macros, obviously, but there is quite a lot of documentation on the Scala website about the metaprogramming capabilities of Scala 3. It is very useful. It was for me. And I can recommend a repo on GitHub called .tmacros examples from LAMP EFL, I think. It's quite old, but there are some very nice examples of patterns that might actually often work for you, and you can just copy paste it and play with it. And yeah, it's very, very useful, I'd say.
Okay, I think that's a wrap. Unfortunately, I don't see any questions. So maybe we'll get them later on Reddit, but for now, I think that will be all. So thank you, Matthieu. Thank you, Łukasz, for joining us today and sharing your story of the migration. And thanks to all the audience for listening.